War can feel like a distant concept. It's something we see in history books or watch in movies. We learn about the great wars of the past, like World War I, World War II. Those conflicts reshaped the globe. They redrew maps and changed the course of human history forever. But it's easy to think of war as something that happened back then. The reality, however, is much more immediate and far more unsettling. War is not just a relic of the past. It is a present and persistent force in our world today, shaping the lives of millions of people right now. As you read this, understanding war is crucial because its effects are never truly contained. A conflict in one part of the world can send ripple effects across the entire planet. It can disrupt supply chains, making everyday goods more expensive. It can create refugee crises, forcing millions to flee their homes in search of safety. It can strain international relations, pushing nations further apart. In our interconnected age, an explosion in a distant city can be felt in the stock markets of New York, the gas prices in California, and the political debates in Washington. Ignoring these conflicts is not an option, because sooner or later, their consequences will arrive at our doorstep. It can be difficult to keep track of the conflicts simmering and exploding across the globe. The news cycle moves fast, but several key conflicts continue to demand the world's attention. The most prominent, of course, has been the war in Ukraine. What began in 2022 as a full-scale invasion by Russia has morphed into a brutal, grinding war of attrition. It is a conflict fought with 21st century drones, 20th century artillery, devastating cities, displacing millions. Moving to the Middle East, the situation remains a tinderbox of tension and violence. The long-standing Israeli-Palestinian conflict continues cycles of devastating violence. There is no lasting political solution in sight. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza draws constant international concern and condemnation. Africa is also wrestling with widespread instability and conflict. In the Sahel, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, persistent insurgencies, political instability, and military coups. Further east, tensions remain high around Ethiopia after the brutal Tigray conflict. Sudan. Rival military factions plunge the nation into devastating civil war. China. Taiwan. They are the smoldering embers in a world that feels dangerously dry. Untangling the web of who is involved in these conflicts is a complex task. The lines are rarely clean. Let's start with Ukraine. Ukraine, fighting for its sovereignty and survival. It is not fighting alone, heavily backed by a broad coalition of Western nations, led by the United States. This support includes military hardware, intelligence sharing, economic aid, training for its soldiers. On the other side, the Russian Federation. Russia initiated the invasion, but it's not entirely alone. Iran, key military supplier of attack drones. North Korea, supplied artillery shells and missiles. China, increased trade and an economic lifeline. That support helps Russia withstand sanctions and fund the war. In the Middle East, alliances are more intricate and shifting. In the Israeli-Palestinian context, the United States is Israel's staunchest ally. Iran backs anti-Israel militant groups. This dynamic fuels a dangerous proxy war. In a globalized world, neutrality is hard to maintain. Everyone seems forced to pick a side. When we think of world wars, we often think of the clear-cut alliances of the past, the Allies versus the Axis powers in World War II. The Allies, led by the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, formed a grand coalition to defeat the Axis Germany, Italy, Japan. These were formal, declared alliances with a shared explicit goal. Today, the situation is more fluid and honestly less formal. We can see the outlines of two broad competing blocs beginning to take shape. One emerging bloc can be loosely described as a coalition of Western-aligned democracies, anchored by the United States, United Kingdom, France, Germany. It also includes key partners in the Pacific: Japan, South Korea, Australia. They are largely united by a shared belief in a rules-based international order, democratic values, free market capitalism. The other bloc is more of an informal alignment of autocratic or authoritarian states, often defined by their shared opposition to the United States and the Western-led order. Led by China-Russia, they see the current international system as unfairly dominated by Washington and are actively working to create an alternative. But a strategic partnership of convenience, aimed at challenging American power and creating a multipolar world where they have greater freedom of action. This is the question hanging over all of these discussions. With major powers backing opposite sides in a brutal European war, with proxy conflicts raging in the Middle East, and with tensions reaching a boiling point in Asia, has World War III already begun? The answer depends entirely on how you define it. If your definition of a world war is a direct, declared military conflict between the world's great powers, with soldiers from the United States, China, and Russia fighting each other on the battlefield, then the answer is no. We are not there, and we must all hope we never get there. However, if you broaden the definition, the picture becomes much more alarming. A world war can also be defined as a series of interconnected, globalized conflicts where major powers are deeply, if indirectly, involved on opposing sides. A conflict where the battlefields are not just physical, but also economic, technological, and informational. In this sense, the argument that we are already in the early stages of a third world war becomes much more plausible. The war in Ukraine is not just about Ukraine. It's a proxy conflict between Russia and the entire NATO alliance. The economic war of sanctions and counter-sanctions is being fought on a global scale, affecting nearly every country. Think of it as a world war in pieces. Whether we call it World War III or not, the world is more dangerous and unstable today than it has been at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis. As a journalist, I have spent much of my career reporting from war zones. I have stood in the rubble of bombed-out apartment buildings. I have spoken with parents who have lost their children and children who have lost their parents. I have seen firsthand what bullets and bombs do to human bodies, and I can tell you that from up close, war has no glory. There is no triumphant soundtrack. There is only the smell of dust and death, the cries of the wounded, and the deafening silence of what has been lost. It is the ultimate failure of diplomacy, of leadership, and of our shared humanity. The most profound impact of war is always on ordinary people. It is the teacher who can no longer teach because her school is a pile of bricks. It is the farmer who cannot plant his fields because they are littered with landmines. It is the doctor trying to save lives in a hospital with no electricity or clean water. It is the millions of refugees forced to leave everything they have ever known behind, carrying only what they can hold in their hands and the memories in their hearts. These are not statistics on a page. They are individual lives, hopes, and dreams. Because every war, no matter how it is justified, is a profound and devastating tragedy. We find ourselves at a critical juncture in history. The world is fractured, divided into competing blocks. Conflicts are raging across the globe. International institutions designed to prevent war often seem paralyzed. The United Nations, for example, looks unable to meet the moment. It is an unsettling and dangerous time. The old order is crumbling. A new one has not yet been born. We are living in the uncertain space in between. The path forward is far from clear. Decisions made now will shape the 21st century. Can the world's major powers manage their competition without direct conflict? The United States, China. Can they cooperate on climate change, pandemics, nuclear proliferation? This will require statesmanship and diplomatic skill. Open lines of communication to prevent miscalculations. Recognition that war would be a catastrophe for humanity. Ultimately, the future is not pre-written. It is not inevitable we're heading to global catastrophe. History is made by choices. Pursue diplomacy over confrontation. Build bridges instead of walls. The future of our world literally depends on it.